You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in BioHealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk. And as you know, we do podcasts with leaders within the BioHealth Capital Region, very interesting entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists, researchers, and we're going to do something different today. We're actually going to have a couple biohealth innovation associates on this podcast to tell you what they do and the types of services that we can help provide to those emerging biohealth companies in our region, in the United States, and around the world. And I have basically Monique Bennett, Senior Life Science Business Strategist, and Kelly Murphy, Life Science Business Strategist, with me on BioTalk today. Monique and Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hi, Rich.
Hi, how are you doing? And I just saw you recently as we've been talking about our pipeline of companies that we're trying to help support for the next submissions for the April 5th deadline for some of the SBIRs. But we're going to get more into detail on that later. But I think the first thing that we normally do on the podcast is give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners, because you can do it better than I can. So a little bit of background on sort of what you did in college, brought you into your career, and how you ended up with biohealth innovation. And we're going to start with Monique. Monique, a little bit about your history.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Rich. I'm so happy to be here today. I was a scientist for about 10 years before joining BHI. I did my undergrad work at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, where I majored in biology. I then did a master's in cellular and molecular biology at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I worked with Mark Forsyth and studied two-component signal transduction and Helicobacter pylori, which is a really mean bug. It can cause ulcers and even gastric cancer. So I really enjoyed that work and decided to continue pursuing a degree in microbiology. So I went on to do my PhD at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. There, I worked with James Crow and Eric Scarr, where I studied the antibody-mediated humoral response to Staph aureus. And so we really did a lot of basic science research looking at vaccine design to Staph aureus, which is a really hot topic in the field because a lot of people have spent a lot of time and money trying to make a vaccine to Staph aureus, and yet there's still not one brought to market. So I really enjoyed that. After graduating, I stayed on for a few years as a professor at Vanderbilt University, working in pediatrics, infectious disease, with Dr. Isaac Thompson, who's an absolutely amazing pediatrician and scientist. And we continued to look more on the host side of the immune response of Staph aureus and looking more at what happens after you have invasive infection in children with Staph aureus, and if we could discover any factors in serum that can really help attack and prevent Staph aureus infection moving forward. But through all of those studies, I realized that what I was really interested in was more of the commercialization, more of what the vaccine development, bringing that to market. And so I decided to pursue a career a little bit outside of academia, and that's what brought me here to BHI.
Well, we're so glad to have you, Monique, and your background's fantastic. And I know James Crow personally, who's world-renowned and also was sort of the lead scientist with the Global Pandemic Prevention and Biodefense Center, which is headquartered in Montgomery County, Maryland. And Dr. Crow has been very active in our partnership in standing up that new center, which is trying to look at biologics, which can be stockpiled to potentially when the next pandemic hits. So you've been very fortunate to work with some very renowned scientists in your careers based on your past histories, and we're glad that you joined us. But by the way, how did you find BHI?
LinkedIn, actually, is where I found it.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so the social media is working, huh?
That's right.
Very good. Well, you have a partner that you work with on a day-to-day basis, Kelly Murphy. Kelly, talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Murphy. I'm excited to be here today, and I am a life science business strategist at BHI. I've been working here for a little over 6 months, or about 2 grant cycles worth. For college, I went to the University of Nevada, Reno, where I studied neuroscience and chemistry. I worked in a concussion lab there. I graduated May 2020, right in the pandemic, decided to knock out my master's in that time. And I recently graduated from Northwestern University with my master's in biotechnology. I just moved back to my hometown of Las Vegas. I also found BHI through LinkedIn, but now I feel we have a strong connection with Northwestern through that. I also found myself not so interested in benchwork science anymore and was also interested in the commercialization aspect. I found BHI very interesting for that point, but then also for their broad portfolio of companies that they work with. I figured it would be an amazing experience to get a lot of exposure and meet some really great people.
Kelly, we're glad to have you at BHI and glad that LinkedIn is one of our partners. And we probably should maybe advertise a little bit more on it. You know, one of the things that's very unique about Kelly and Monique is pre-pandemic, BHI used to hire all of its analysts and entrepreneurs and residents who were local to Maryland, DC, and Virginia because everybody came to the office. And what's interesting now with Monique being in Nashville and Kelly being in Las Vegas is we're able to get the best talent that's available in the United States and not have to require them to move to Montgomery County, Maryland, because we're sort of in this hybrid virtual work environment right now. And we're really glad we might not have been able to attract Monique or Kelly to BHI if it would have required a move to Montgomery County, Maryland. And maybe I'll ask them that. Monique, would you still have come to BHI if you would have had to move?
I probably wouldn't even have applied, actually, if I had known. So I'm glad that in this virtual world, that there are more opportunities.
How about you, Kelly?
I would have considered, definitely. I wasn't tied down to Chicago. It was too cold for me. So I liked the freedom of getting to choose where to go. And I haven't lived near home in a long time. So it's been nice being back.
Great. And you talked about it was too cold in Chicago, but in our staff meeting today, you said it's 35 in Las Vegas today. So you can't get away from the cold, can you?
No, it's very annoying.
So let's talk a little bit about your day-to-day functions. And before we do that, BioHealth Innovation has been around about 11 years. And we have a history of supporting entrepreneurs, scientists, researchers, and small businesses in what we call pre-proposal assistance as they're looking to apply for different types of federal grants, whether it's NIH, NSF, DOD, or other different organizations. And it's something that has been very fundamental for us because when we created BHI, we did an analysis of the different types of needs that entrepreneurs have and where are the gaps of things that they're not readily available to help them with. And one of the first things I found was that in our region, the BioHealth Capital Region, there was not what you'd classify a formal pre-proposal assistance service offered by a local entity in our region. There are a number of national firms that do this, but we really didn't have people within the region providing this type of a detailed and hands-on experience working with companies. There are other entities in our region like TEDCO that might provide tutorial programs or mentoring services. But it really, as you listen to Kelly and Monique talk today, you'll find what the difference is of what BHI offers versus other people in this industry. And the other thing that's very unique is that we've helped raise over $57 million in research grants for our winners. We have a 51% success rate. And approximately 100 companies that we have helped have won federal grants based on the services that our team has provided to them. So we know that it is well above the national average, but we're very selective in the companies that we work with because we know everybody can't win. And we really have to do a good job in screening these companies in advance before we try to assist them because we want each of them that has the best shot to get the best support in the proposals that they're writing. So that's a little history. And I'm not going to go into the details of what we do because Monique and Kelly are much better prepared to do that than I am. So why don't we start a little bit, Monique, and just talk about some of the basic elements of what we describe as our proposal assistance services.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few different types of services that we provide. One of them is more of a full development program, and then one is targeted development. And so we really, if we contract with a company to do full development, then we really come alongside the company from start to finish. We help them project manage, we help them with the overall narrative, we help them craft specific aims, develop the budget, and even submit the grant. So we're really going to become your partner at this stage and do whatever you need to get your grant submitted. Whereas if we do a more targeted submission, then we're going to commit a little bit of less time. This is more 10 to 20 hours where we're going to provide general feedback, grantsmanship advice, maybe do some editing of your commercialization plan and your business strategy, because that's sometimes what companies struggle with. But it's a little bit more of a targeted assistance.
And basically, you talk about something aims. And, we'll talk a little bit more about this in depth, but isn't that one of the more critical elements that is needed that NIH or the other agencies will be looking at is what the aims are for this proposal?
Absolutely. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that not everyone is going to read your entire proposal. These things are tens of pages long, 60 pages or so, maybe even 100. And so if not everyone's going to read your proposal, one thing they are going to read is that one-page specific aims. And so you want to make sure that that really shines. And one problem that I think a lot of academics in particular have is that they use specific aims that are very academic focused. They recycle them from their R01s, for example. Or maybe they're too similar. Aim 1 is very similar to aim 2, and they don't separate them enough. So you really want to make sure you spend a great deal of time on that specific aims page and let it shine and really represent your project accurately.
We'll talk a little bit more about aims later as we get into some of those recommendations you're going to have, Monique. But Kelly, you've mentioned you've been through 2 cycles now, and you've probably been involved in different phases of full proposals as well as just doing some targeted. So you want to explain a little bit of difference in the way that you've worked on the full proposals versus the targeted proposals?
Yes, absolutely. So with the full proposals, like Monique said, we really do become a part of your team. Some companies will come to us with an idea of what their aims will be, or we will help guide them and kind of help with the strategy of the grant, of the project even, to come up with these aims. As far as the more targeted program, it's sometimes with a resubmission, we'll take a look at reviewers' comments and help improve different areas that were highlighted. But then it also could be just from scratch. If someone has experience writing grants and just wants a fresh set of eyes to look at it, we can also help with that. Or look at specific areas. If you're not very familiar with how to do a budget, we can help with the budget. If you're not very familiar with the commercialization plan, we can help with that.
And then for both of you, we're really heavy into the business assistance, but at the same time, you have to have some understanding of the science. So how much do you take for granted that the scientist or the technology you're working with is unique, innovative, where we're really going to focus more on the business side, commercialization strategy, market strategy, and things like that? How deeply do you get in analyzing the science for those differential advantages where they would have a chance of winning with their proposal? Monique?
This is something that we really rely on the company to think through. And while we work with them quite a bit, we want to make sure that they're confident in their science. So we can come alongside them and help them talk through their science and make sure that it makes sense. And that as an outside, we can play the part of the reviewer, read through it, make sure it's logical, rational, that it's well developed. But at the end of the day, the company's going to be the one performing the science and analyzing the data. And we have to make sure that they're comfortable doing that and communicating that coherently.
Great. Kelly, what kind of experience have you had with the companies you've worked with related to this science versus business balance?
Yeah. So like Monique said, we can't be subject matter experts in every single type of technology that we help out with, even though we do have strong scientific backgrounds. So we'll take some time, read some papers, and become very familiar. But we will also have to rely on the company to have an idea and be able to write the scientific heavy sections. We'll be able to craft it in a way that makes sense for the grant, but we will need the extra help from the scientists themselves.
I think one of the benefits both of you have today, which some of our earlier analysts did not have, is that we have 15 entrepreneurs in residence or personnels working at NIH now under our contract with NIH. And we have 3 new entrepreneurs in residence in Montgomery County, Maryland, working with Montgomery County companies. So the diversity of experience networks that these EIRs have, I would imagine, have been beneficial to both of you as you're looking for additional knowledge related to the companies, the technologies, the markets, and maybe talk a little bit about that interaction, Monique.
Yes, you bring up an excellent point, Rich. And speaking of the entrepreneurs in residence, I also wanted to mention, not only are they just a great resource because they have expertise in regulatory and different scientific matters and just even owning a company and what that looks like, but we also offer assistance that's completely free for companies called EIR Day. So if a company wants 1 hour to just present to BHI, maybe get some feedback on their pitch deck or ask targeted questions about how their company should be structured, what the best next steps for them are, how to find investors, any of these types of questions, we can bring on some of our entrepreneurs in residence, have them on that call, and the company can get feedback from everyone. And that's a really great way just to find out if you're ready for an SBIR. So that's another assistance that BHI offered.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a monthly program. We just had it on January the 18th. We had 3 companies present. They got instantaneous feedback from the EIRs and the analysts and the other members of the BHI team. These companies can be from anywhere in the United States or around the world, and we have talked to a number of international as well as other companies. The funny thing that this EIR Day does, Monique and Kelly, is that we're talking to companies in California or San Francisco or Boston or New York, where you would think all of the resources in the world exist to have this type of feedback, but they're coming to BioHealth Innovation in Montgomery County, Maryland to get this kind of feedback. So it's really neat to know that we have some unique resources to provide those kind of insights that some of these other locations don't have organizations similar to BHI. And Kelly, are you finding that to be true based on some of the companies you've interacted with?
Yes, of course. I love the EIRs. They're part of the reason why I was interested in BHI in the first place, just because they have so much experience and I have so much to learn from them. These companies have so much to learn from. They're just a great resource for all of us, really.
Great. Well, we hope to continue to expand that program and also find ways to get them more integrated in what you guys do every day. Let's also talk about the stage of a company that is the typical person that you work with or should be considering working with BHI and our analyst team in this proposal world. And Monique, what do you believe are the basic elements that a company needs to be at, or a different stage that the company should be at before they should consider applying for some of this non-dilutive funding?
So I think what we really want to look for is a company that's in a growth stage, maybe one that's ready to pursue healthcare initiatives, that is looking into commercialization already, maybe one that has already some solid traction, has existing customers. You don't necessarily need to be profitable yet, but you know how to look towards solid growth. If you're still working on your business plan, if you haven't even developed your product yet, if you don't even have a board or things like that, if you're still trying to figure out some of those kinks, then you might want to sit tight a little bit, get some of the fundamentals of the business nailed down. But I think really growth stage companies are what we are most interested in helping.
And then let's also talk about what areas. Our term of biohealth is very broad. It's not biotech, it's not pharmaceuticals, it's not medical devices. But if you look at the range of companies, from pharmaceuticals to biologics, devices, digital health, or whatever, Kelly, I guess we have a chance to work with many different companies in many different fields.
Yeah, that's very true. In my short time here, I've seen everything from traditional drug development in the way that you would think of pharmaceuticals, larger molecules, proteins, and digital health interventions as well. So we're able to help in a lot of different ways for a lot of different companies.
And that's sort of where the EIRs come in, because there is no one individual that has knowledge about everything that there is in the whole biohealth field. And based on your experience and other members of the BHI team, we feel we cover the waterfront because no one can know it all, but we basically pull upon the resources we have to draw their expertise as we're evaluating companies. Another thing on stage of company is that each company, if you're going to submit, has to have a PI. Do you want to talk a little bit about the PI requirement, Monique?
Yes, this is a really important point, I think, especially for scientists that work in academia or that have other full-time jobs. Because being an investigator is one of the 5 things that the NIH scores on. And the principal investigator who applies on the grant needs to commit more than 50% of their time to the proposal and the work that's being proposed in the grant. So if you have a full-time position at a research institution somewhere, you can't also be the PI on the grant. So you need to find someone who's fully committed to the work that's being proposed. And as I mentioned, that's something that they're going to score you on as well. So you need to show that you're fully committed to the grant.
Well, I'm glad you brought up scoring, because it was sort of my next question, because how do they evaluate grants and who evaluates proposals at the NIH or the different agencies? And maybe between you and Kelly, you can talk about the 5 elements that proposals are scored on and actually who does the scoring. And I'll let you two determine who wants to cover what part of that.
So after submission, it will take a little bit of time, but you'll receive an overall impact score as well as kind of a broken down criteria score. The overall impact score is on a 9-point rating scale, with 1 being exceptional and 9 being poor. As a 5 considered to be an average score, you'll typically see somewhere between 1 and 3, or it can also be seen as about 10 to 99. 1 and 3 being what gets funded from the NIH usually. And so there are 5 different criteria that you will be scored on. These are significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. You'll be able to see your score on a summary statement that you'll receive from the NIH, and you'll also be given a breakdown from each reviewer on that criteria. So 3 people will be looking at your grant. Each criteria is given a numerical value of 1 to 5, 1 being the best score, 5 having the most issues. The summary statements will also provide written feedback from each reviewer on each criteria. And then with these measures, the NIH is assessing the project's importance, but also likelihood of success. With both the overall impact score and the criteria scores, the lower the better, pretty much.
That's great information, Kelly. And maybe Monique can talk about what happens when the company gets scored. What do they do with that scoring? How long does it take after the proposal's been submitted to be scored? If they get a good score, what happens then? And also what happens if you get a bad score?
Yes. So about 30% of applications are not going to be discussed, which can be really difficult because then you don't know exactly where you went wrong. And it can be difficult to know if you should resubmit. If you received maybe a score between 1 and 3.2 or 32, that's usually where the pay line is going to fall. So you have a great chance of getting your grant funded at that point. But that money is going to take a while to arrive, usually about 6 months, maybe even longer, because it takes a little bit of time to determine who's going to get that money and to get that divvied out. So you should know that when you apply for an SBIR grant, that you're not going to get that money for a while. Not only is it going to take a few months to apply, but it's going to take some time for it to be reviewed and then even longer before those funds are received. Now, if you got a score in the 3s or in around 30, as they do often multiply that by a factor of 10. So a 3.2 can become a 32, for example. So if you get a score in the 30s that ended up not being funded, you have a great chance of resubmitting and potentially getting that funded. So at that point, when you get your summary statement, a few months later after resubmitting, then you may want to consider just addressing the concerns that the reviewers brought up and resubmitting at that time.
And then when you're talking about resubmitting, first of all, timing for grants, the NIH specifically has solicitation dates generally throughout the year, which apply to most agencies, but some institutes have, a little variance. But we're looking at April 5th, September 5th, and January 5th for 3 primary submission dates. So you submit, you get scored, you don't get a good score. How soon after you have gotten your score that's not going to be funded can you resubmit back on that proposal?
You can submit with the next grant cycle. Say you submitted January 5th, found out you got a decent score, but were not funded. You could submit then again for April 5th. You can also, I wanted to add to Monique's point for the last question, that once you've received your score, you should be reaching out to the program officer for the agency that you submitted to discuss how you were scored, why you were scored, maybe get some additional feedback, and that can help assess whether you want to submit, whether you're ready to resubmit for this next grant cycle. You could always take a beat and apply maybe in September instead, and then really understanding your areas of improvement.
Yeah, you're talking about reaching out to the program manager after you've been scored, but there's nothing that prevents you from reaching out to the program manager before submission. They're not going to tell you all of the answers, but they're willing to talk to you about that. So talk to you about what you're thinking about proposing. So do you want to talk a little bit about that process and how you would encourage everybody to try to have some preliminary discussions with the institute or the program manager before they'd actually submit the proposal?
Yeah, so definitely this is not the first time you should be talking to your program manager. We encourage as early as possible. So pretty much the program manager is a person within the specific agency that you're going to be submitting to, whether that's like the NIA, NCI, anything within the NIH. This is a person who administers these different programs, set priorities on committing the federal funding, and will advocate for a specific area. So early on in the writing process, you'll reach out to the appropriate program manager to see if your project is a good fit for funding from that agency. This can be done before you even seek out help with BHI, or within the first few weeks of working together, we can also help coordinate this meeting.
And Monique, how much time is required to really develop a good quality proposal that you're going to submit? Because, we get people that will inquire 2 weeks before the date. But if it's April 5th and somebody gets to you on March 15th, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to put a high quality proposal unless they've had a lot of writing experience. So what are your recommendations for guidelines on how much time it would take to really do a quality proposal?
We recommend 3 months. That's a really good amount of time because it takes a while to really reach out to, for example, the program manager. That's one of the things that is really important to do at the very beginning because they can help you determine what phase of grant to go for, what overall FOA to go for, which is the funding announcement. You just want to make sure that you are finding the right fit for your proposal. And that's something you need to determine at the very beginning. It also takes some time to get your grant registrations done. And some of them actually take weeks to process. And so if you're doing those at the last minute, 2 weeks before, you may not even be registered in time to submit your grant. And that would be a real travesty if you got your proposal package all together and then you went to submit and you weren't registered and couldn't even get it done.
Talk a little bit about the types of registrations that are required.
There are a few main ones: grants.gov, SAM, or System for Award Management.gov, and then NIH has ERA Commons. And so those are the three big ones that we recommend going ahead and registering for as soon as you know that you want to submit a grant.
Super. And I think that's very important because, as you say, it could take 2 weeks to get a registration, or sometimes we've worked with some companies and it's taken as much as 6 months. So if you're anticipating, the sooner the better. And one of the other things I wanted to go back on, when you talk about it might take 6 months to get funding from the award after you've been notified that you've won, most people need to understand you can't fund your business on SBIR grants. They are supplemental to what your day-to-day funding should be, and it would be looked at as incremental funding rather than primary funding for your company. And you need other sources because there's no guarantee that you're going to win your proposal and use that for your day-to-day operating capital to keep your company going. So let's focus on some of the challenges for the future with these entrepreneurs and scientists. What do you see as the most common problems that you run into, whether it's evaluating a company, whether it's in the writing of the proposal stage or the communication with them? What are the most common problems you have encountered in working with these companies?
I think one of the biggest issues that we see is that there are just fundamental differences between an SBIR grant and an academic grant, like an R01. Whereas an academic grant is focused on discovery, and the point of a lot of that research is to get a publication, and you want to show that you've been active in discovering and publishing papers. And SBIR is focused on developing a product and commercialization. For most SBIR grants, you are going to actually submit a 10-page commercialization plan where you talk about your patents, for example. So if you are not submitting a provisional patent, or if you don't have a patent, that could be a real problem. You need to make sure that you can show that this idea is something that you own and is protected by your company. And that's something that can be a little bit different for a small company or that is spun out of a university, for example. The PI issue is also something that we see quite a bit, where you need to make sure that you're really committed to your company, and perhaps you have a second job and you can't give 51% of your time. So you really want to make sure that you're fully dedicated to the company and your product.
Kelly, what specific problems have you run into in the companies you've worked with?
Yeah, so not necessarily with the companies that we've worked with, but maybe some companies that we have vetted. And one thing is that they're just simply not ready. How Monique was talking about the difference between an SBIR and an academic grant. Yes, you need money to fund this project, but also you need to have enough done beforehand. You need enough primary research. You need some solid data for the NIH to believe in your product and its likelihood of success.
Well, now that you guys are old hands at this and unbelievably experienced and, astute members of BioHealth Innovation, let's close by talking about your top tips for those scientists, entrepreneurs, companies out there listening, if they're considering or they're in the process of preparing a proposal to submit to whether it's NIH or some other federal agency. And we'll start with you, Monique.
We've already touched on this a little bit, but just to elaborate, one of the most important things is to make sure that you're choosing the right institute, whether it's one for aging, for Alzheimer's, for muscular dystrophy. There are multiple different agencies within the NIH. So you want to make sure that you choose the one that fits your company and the product you're showing. And then under each institute, there are also different requests for proposals, requests for applications and funding announcements. And those are going to tell you the amount of funds set aside, the number of awards they're going to give, and then once again, the due dates. And so if you choose the right application or the right announcement for your application, then you have a better chance of success from the very beginning. Because if your product just doesn't match what you're applying to, then you're not going to have a good chance of getting your grant awarded. So that's one of the things that from the very beginning, you need to make sure that you're really thinking about.
Great tip. How about you, Kelly? You have some tips too?
Yeah, I guess kind of echoing Monique with that is reach out to the program manager as soon as possible. This will help to understand if it is a good fit. And another thing would be to stay focused. You might have a million ideas for your project, and it could help with a million different indications. But for the purpose of the grant, you should stay focused on, or as narrow as you can get. And this will also help reaching out to the program manager to narrow down your ideas.
Well, this has been very helpful for me, and I guarantee it's helpful for the listeners because I've learned some things today that I might not have known based on what you guys interact with on a day-to-day basis. So we generally close this session of the Biotech podcast with any comments that either of you would like to make that we didn't cover that you feel the listeners would be interested in. So I'll close first with Monique Bennett, our Senior Life Science Business Strategist at BHI. Monique, anything else you want to share?
Just that if anybody wants to reach out to us, they can feel free to find us on the website, and we will be happy to talk with them and plug them in with EIRs or help them directly as best we can.
And if they wanted to email you directly, what is that email address?
They can reach out to me. It's kmurphy, MURPHY, at biohealthinnovation.org. And Monique's is mbennett, 2 N's, 2 T's, at biohealthinnovation.org.
I surprised you with something that's really the most difficult question of the whole podcast, Monique.
That's right. Too many email addresses.
Kelly, did you have any other words you wanted to share?
I think we covered all the good tips, everything already, but we're excited to learn about all these different companies, all these different projects. So please reach out. We can help in more ways than just SBIRs. If you're interested in EIR Day, we have a lot of great things going on at BHI.
Super. And by the way, if anybody wants to know the dates for the EIR Day, all you have to do is to go to biohealthinnovation.org, our website, and you look under events, and EIR Day is listed there. And I think the dates are posted for the rest of this year. And there's one day per month that is eligible, and you can sign up actually online or contact us directly. So I think that Monique Bennett and Kelly Murphy, our life science business strategists with BioHealth Innovation, are basically describing how we're here to help. And even if you are not a candidate, we'll be glad to answer questions for you if you're considering doing something. So, and also help you prepare to get ready. If you're not ready today, it might be a year from now. We'll be glad to work with you in that interim period to help you prepare so that you can put a quality proposal together. So Monique and Kelly, welcome to BHI. We're glad that you're doing a fantastic job today. We've got nothing but accolades from all the companies that you've worked with, and we look forward to servicing many more companies in the future. So thank you for being on BioTalk.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Rich.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.